Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. This video is the next in a series looking at major financial frauds, which is something that absolutely fascinates me. Now, when we're talking about fraud, there's usually a variety of different reasons why the fraudster behind it wants to do it. The main driver for a lot of frauds is to make a lot of money for themselves, to become wealthy and to rip people off. And generally speaking, those people can be classified as criminals because they're doing something criminal from day one. They're lying to you about what you're investing into. The other sorts of frauds are people who get carried away with things. They start off with a genuine business and then for whatever reason, things don't go to plan. They start doing things that they shouldn't, cooking the books and doing things like that, and then they get caught out and go to prison. So generally speaking, those sort of fraudsters don't set out with the sole intention of ripping people off. They just get carried away with the momentum. And then I think there's a third type of fraudster, somebody who's just a born liar. And in today's video, we're going to talk about a US graduate who told the world that she'd invented a groundbreaking machine that could do blood tests at a really low cost. And this got everybody super excited. So excited, in fact, that her company became valued at $9 billion. And she became, at that time, the world's youngest self-made female billionaire. But unfortunately, everything was a complete lie. The machine didn't work. It was just a complete fabrication. But she managed to fool a lot of people for a lot of time. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. While studying at Stanford University, Elizabeth Holmes came up with a groundbreaking idea that she believed was going to change the world. She dropped out of university in order to pursue her dreams. By 2014, Elizabeth Holmes was 30 years old, the world's youngest self-made billionaire and on top of the world. She had founded a company valued at $9 billion that was bringing about a revolution in diagnosing disease. With a few drops of blood, Theranos promised that its Edison test could detect conditions such as cancer and diabetes quickly without the hassle of needles. There was just one problem: it didn't work. However, that didn't stop her creating a multi-billion-dollar company, Theranos, on the back of the idea. Highly respected individuals from Henry Kissinger to General James Mattis sat on the board. But by 2015, the seams were coming apart, and within a year, Holmes was exposed as a fake. The technology she touted didn't work at all, and by 2018, the company she founded had collapsed. She was convicted by a jury in California on 4 counts of fraud, each of which carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. This is the story of how one woman's dreams turned into lies, deceit, and a nightmare. Welcome to the world of Theranos. Elizabeth Holmes was raised in a comfortably well-off family in Washington, D.C. and was a polite but withdrawn child, according to people who knew her. At age 9, she wrote a letter to her father declaring that what she really wanted out of life was to discover something new, something that mankind didn't know what was possible. When she got to Stanford University in 2002 to study chemical engineering, she came up with an idea for a patch that could scan the wearer for infections and release antibiotics as needed. That patch never made it to market, but Holmes' other big idea was a revolutionary way to test blood from a simple finger prick. Months later, Holmes dropped out of Stanford aged 19 and launched Theranos, with the name formed as a mashup of therapy and diagnosis. Holmes' idea was to develop a machine that could test for a variety of diseases through only a few drops of blood from a person's finger. The machine was named Edison, after the inventor Thomas Edison, and it promised to revolutionize blood testing. Edison would allow the testing process to take place at pharmacies and to produce results in hours. This was a game changer for blood tests, and Theranos planned to charge less than half the rates charged by the established players in the market, and was forecast to provide the US government with savings of over $200 billion over the next 10 years. By 2014, the company had raised more than $945 million and was valued at more than $9 billion. Powerful people were enthralled and invested without seeing audited financial results. US Treasury Secretary George Shultz, media tycoon Rupert Murdoch, and America's richest family, the Waltons, were among her backers. The support lent her credibility, as did her demeanour. Holmes was worth $4.5 billion according to Forbes magazine, making her the youngest self-made billionaire. She was a media celebrity and held up as an iconic woman in business. She also convinced big names to join her board, including 2 former US Secretaries of State,
Henry Kissinger and George Shultz. With hindsight, it is easy to point out that few of the names, whilst famous, had much to do with medicine or science. Elizabeth Holmes cultivated an impressive public figure, and similar to another leading entrepreneur, Steve Jobs, she only wore black turtlenecks in public. She went vegan and talked enthusiastically of her favourite wheatgrass celery cucumber green juice. She spoke on panels with Bill Clinton and gave impassioned TED Talks. There was even talk of making a movie based on her tentatively titled Bad Blood. But if she talked the talk, there were hints that Theranos did not quite walk the walk. Holmes was obsessively secretive about the company where she was founder, chief executive and chairman. Nothing was done without her approval, and when it came to talking about Edison, the shutters came down. When asked by a New York reporter how the Edison machine worked, she replied, "A chemistry is performed so that a chemical reaction occurs and generates a signal from the chemical interaction with the sample, which is translated into a result which is then reviewed by certified laboratory personnel." With hindsight, all of this seems like utter nonsense. However, because of the cult of Holmes, everybody believed what she was saying. In 2013, Bill Maris, founder of Google Ventures, decided not to invest after stating that he had got a member of his life sciences investment team to take the blood test and did not believe the claims being made by Theranos. Wall Street Journal's John Carreyrou interviewed Theranos employees who started to tell a very different story from that of the dazzling public image. And this was the start of Theranos' downfall. Erica Chung and Tyler Schultz, whose grandfather George Schultz served on the board of directors for Theranos, were formerly employed by the business. Despite being threatened with legal action, they revealed their experiences within the company, its technology and its practices. The story from within was that the Edison results were inaccurate and that the vast majority of tests were not done in Theranos labs at all, but in conventional machines bought from mainstream suppliers. They revealed a web of lies, a culture of intimidation and secrecy, technology that failed quality assurance tests on multiple occasions, and most shockingly of all, results that were sent to actual patients that were fundamentally incorrect and used to make life-changing medical decisions. It appeared that the entire foundation of Theranos was laid on deliberate deception. After the story was published in October 2015, the US financial regulator, the Securities and Exchange Commission, opened an investigation. Holmes disputed the allegations against both her and the company and threatened to sue. The game was well and truly up for Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which oversee blood testing laboratories, later revoked Theranos' license, and within a year the company began shutting down its labs. In 2018, the Securities and Exchange Commission charged Holmes with massive fraud. She was accused of taking more than $700 million from investors. Holmes resigned from her position as chief executive, and she and the company's former president, Ramesh Balwani, were both charged with criminal fraud and allegedly deceiving investors and knowingly making false claims about the company's blood testing technology. Following an investigation by the FBI, the company officially shut down 3 months later, leaving thousands of employees out of work. The vast majority of the former employees were unaware of the company's fraudulent activity. During the trial, which started in September 2021, multiple lab directors testified to telling Holmes about the flaws in Theranos' technology. But they claimed they were instructed to downplay these concerns. They also added that Holmes told investigators the technology was operating as planned. The prosecution called 30 witnesses in a bid to prove that Holmes knew the product she was selling to investors was a sham. Holmes was accused of destroying evidence during the company's final days of operation. During her testimony in her own defence, Elizabeth Holmes recognised that mistakes had been made in the running of Theranos, yet she maintained that she had never deliberately deceived patients or investors. Prosecutor Jeff Schenck said in his closing argument that Holmes chose fraud over business failure. She chose to be dishonest with investors and patients. That choice is not only callous, it was criminal. In November 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was sentenced to a total of 135 months or 11 years and 3 months in federal prison for defrauding investors. In his sentencing summary, Judge Edward Davila said, "Capital investment is critical to innovation. When fraud is perpetrated on those providing the necessary capital, it staunches investment and can cripple an industry. For almost a decade, Elizabeth Holmes fabricated and spread elaborate falsehoods to draw in a legion of capital investors, both big and small, and her deceit caused the loss of hundreds of millions of dollars. Her sentence reflects the audacity of her massive fraud and the staggering damage she caused."
Frauds such as the one perpetrated by Holmes can erode investor confidence, which impacts our capital markets. Today's sentence should serve as a warning that deceiving investors will not be tolerated. In May 2023, Elizabeth Holmes, who by then was a 39-year-old mother of two, started her prison sentence in an all-female facility 100 miles outside of Houston. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, as I mentioned at the start of today's video, there are various reasons why people perpetrate fraud. And for Elizabeth Holmes, it seemed to be a combination of both ego and financial gain. At the peak of this fraud, she was the youngest female self-made billionaire in the world. And I'm sure ego was a major driver here. Elizabeth Holmes was seen as being a leading light in the field that she was working in. She was a guru. Everybody looked to her as an absolute genius. But unfortunately, none of that was founded on reality. All of it was a lie. And you have to ask the question as to why somebody didn't realise this sooner. How can you get away with building a business that becomes valued at $9 billion and taking hundreds of millions of dollars off people in the process? Surely somebody should have checked that that machine was operating in the way that Holmes said that it was. And certainly when you've got a company with hundreds of employees, somebody must have known that this wasn't working. But I guess once the snowball starts gathering pace, it's difficult to become that whistleblower, put your hand up and say, do you know what? None of this is actually real. This is all complete fabrication, especially when you've got somebody as famous and powerful at that time as Elizabeth Holmes. But as with most things, these things don't last forever. And eventually, Elizabeth Holmes was caught out and all of it was exposed as a complete falsehood. None of it was true. And she's now serving her time in prison, which I'm sure is very sad for her children. But unfortunately, that's what happens when you set out to defraud the world of business. You're not going to get away with it in the long run. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's episode and found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you did, then please give me a thumbs up. And here's something to put a smile on your face.